Welcome everyone today to the first webinar of our newly formed group, Data Platform WIT. You can find us many ways. We have a Twitter account, Data WIT. You can email dataplatformwit@gmail.com. We have the page set up where we've got a lot of things listed, like we're also promoting webinars for women at other events and just some general news and resources like our old newsletters at wit-sqlugs.org. There's a Facebook page. There is also our meetup group. And soon I will have after today, I'll also have a YouTube channel. So I'll obviously announce those out there. Here's some of the sessions that are coming up. The Scottish Summit event has over 80 sessions given by women. So instead of listing all of those, which would have been hours of work, we have a PDF. You can click the link if you go to our page and see all of those. And we've got quite a few. New Stars of Data is coming up, and that is very exciting. And in fact, Mala, the co-leader of this group, is presenting at that. And Deepthi can't present at that anymore, but that's one of the ones, you got your start at that, didn't you? Did you?
Yeah.
Okay.
Started with Stars of Data, yeah.
Yeah, so it's a really exciting event for speakers who have not presented on a more than outside of their local user group can present at that. So, and let's go ahead and get, not quite done. Redgate has been giving, I do work for Redgate, full disclosure, but Redgate has been helping us out a lot, providing this platform we're using today, and also we'll be awarding one license of SQL Prompt. So we'll draw a name from the attendees today. If you have a user group and you need help with funds or just about anything you can think of, reach out to Redgate at communities@redgate.com, and we are always really glad to help out the community. So today we're going to talk about life cycle of a query in SQL Server. So this is going to help you understand how SQL works under the covers so that you can tune your queries and make them run faster. So Deepthi Goguri is a SQL Server database administrator with 7 years of experience with SQL Server, and she is an MCT and also certified. And she blogs at DBA Nuggets. And I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing and then pass it over. If you have questions, go ahead and put them in the Q&A. Deepthi, I'm not sure what you want to do as far as answering them. Do you want to just ask for questions once in a while, or do you want to save them till the end? What would you like to do?
Can we do it in the end? Because there's a lot of content to talk about.
Okay. All right. So just put your questions in there, and then we will save those to the end.
Thank you. So can I go ahead and let's start?
Take it away.
Thank you. So hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending upon the time zone you are in. Thank you so much for taking your valued time for attending this session today. First of all, I would like to thank Kathy for giving me this wonderful opportunity. Like once they begin the meetup group, this is my first session, so it will always stand up like that. So thank you so much, Kathy, for this wonderful opportunity. So what are we going to discuss in this session today? We are going to talk about the life cycle of a query in SQL Server. So this session is all about like what happens behind the scenes at each stage inside the SQL engine. So there is a lot of content to grab. So hopefully you like it. So let's get started. A little bit about me. I'm a database administrator with 7 years of experience in managing SQL Server and databases. I'm a Microsoft certified trainer and Microsoft certified solution expert. I did my master's in computer technology at Eastern Illinois University. And I blog for dbnuggets.com. That's my website. And I'm very active on Twitter. If you have any questions regarding this session later, please do not hesitate to contact me either on Twitter or via email. Down below, that's my email address. So what are we going to discuss in this session today? We are going to start with the basics, the ACID properties, and how each and every relational engine should satisfy all their transactions with ACID properties. And we are going to see with an example ensuring the ACID property. We are also going to see the overview of what all components we have inside the memory architecture of SQL Server. Especially in this session, we are mainly focusing on the major components, like the bigger component of all, that's plan cache and the buffer pool. And how does this cache get managed inside SQL Engine? We are also going to see the life cycle of a query for read as well as the write transaction, like what happens at each stage inside the SQL Engine behind the scenes. And we are also going to see the different types of components we have inside the SQL Engine, that's components of the relational engine and the components of the storage engine. So internals, why should we care, right? Even without knowing about the internals, we can just go ahead and do our regular jobs. But many DBAs and developers, they work with SQL Server on daily basis, but they might not exactly understand what happens behind the scenes when we submit any query to SQL Server. So knowing this information will help you in understanding how queries are processed at each stage inside SQL Engine. It will also help you in tracking down the performance issues very quickly and fix them efficiently. It will also build you confidence while managing the database engine as well as the databases. It will also help you in convincing your coworkers or managers of why they have to take your ideas seriously, because by the end of this session, you will come to know how SQL Engine will work behind the scenes. So with all that information, you can go ahead and you can provide your suggestions to your coworkers or managers. They will be impressed, definitely. Last but not least, we work with SQL Server every day. So the more we know about the internals, the better we can understand how SQL Engine works. Let's start with the basics, the ACID properties. Every major relational engines, it can be SQL Server, Oracle, PostgreSQL, Sybase, all these major relational engines should satisfy the ACID properties of transaction. So what is this ACID? A stands for atomicity. Atomic meaning a single unit of work. A single transaction can contain one operation in it, or it can contain multiple operations in it. Each and every transaction should either complete successfully or none of them. Let's take an example of a store procedure. Let's say the store procedure have two operations in it, an update statement as well as an insert statement. Whenever we execute the store procedure, both the operations should either complete successfully or none of them. Like if the update succeeds and if the insert fails, then SQL Server should go ahead and roll back the entire transaction. That's atomicity. C stands for consistency. The data inside the database should always be consistent before starting the transaction and after completing the transaction. Let's take an example. I wanted to do an update statement on a table, and while I'm doing that update, like if something happens suddenly, like if there is a power outage and if we had to restart the SQL Server, once I restart the SQL Server, that particular uncommitted transaction should be completely rolled back and make my data in the consistent state. That's consistency. I stands for isolation. No matter how many concurrent transactions are happening at the same time, each and every individual transaction should be independent of each other and should not be interfering with any other transaction. Let's take an example. I wanted to insert bunch of records into a table, let's say. And while I do that transaction, none of the other transactions which are happening concurrently at the same time, they should not even know that I'm performing this action on the table. They should not interfere with my transaction. That's isolation. D stands for durability. So once the transaction has been successfully completed and all the data that has already been made to the database should be permanent. Like once the transaction is successfully completed, later down the road, if I had to restart the SQL Server, all the committed data, which is now already inside the database, should be permanent and there should not be any data loss. That's durability. So what component of the SQL engine will ensure the ACID property? Atomicity is very easy to be ensured. it is taken care by the parse component inside the relational engine. Consistency is also very easy to be ensured. It is taken care by the parser and binder components inside the relational engine. Once the atomicity, isolation, and durability are ensured, consistency will automatically be ensured. And isolation is all about the locking mechanism. It is taken care by the lock manager inside the storage engine. Durability is the most toughest of all. It is taken care by the transaction log inside the storage engine. Let's take an example of this asset property. Let's say I have a balance of $500 in my account, which have an ID of 1. And I would like to send $100 to my friend's account, which have an ID of 2. This is basically a simple bank transaction. So I can do this simple bank transaction multiple ways, right? I can use online application to do it, or I can even use mobile phone application of the bank, right? So for this example, let's go ahead and take the mobile phone application. So this simple transaction contains 2 operations in it. The first operation is to deduct $100 from my balance, and the second operation is to credit $100 to my friend's account. So once I begin the transaction on my mobile phone, behind the scenes, SQL Server will also begin the transaction. The first operation, SQL Server will go ahead and deduct $100 from my balance, which have an ID of 1, which will make $400. And the second operation is to credit $100 to my friend's account, right? But I suddenly see this on my screen. I am logged out of my mobile phone application, bank application, and I suddenly see this saying, alert, we apologize, this facility is temporarily unavailable. Now wait, what? What has happened? I'm in between the transaction. My transaction is not completed yet. So I'm really confused now because I do not know if I lost my $100 or if my friend has received $100, and I wanted to immediately know where my $100 are. So I immediately called my friend and asked if she received any money, which she said she didn't. So I'm very angry on bank guys. So I immediately called customer service guys to ask what has happened. They said there was a severe thunderstorm and some of their SQL Server went down and they already restarted them. So if this particular transaction is ensuring the asset property, what should happen once they restart the SQL Server? Let's go ahead and see. Once they restarted the SQL Server, that particular uncommitted transaction, right? Because my transaction was stopped in between. So that particular transaction is completely rolled back, making my data in the consistent state. This particular transaction is ensuring the asset property. How? Atomicity is ensured by rolling back the entire transaction. Consistency is ensured by reflecting $500 in my balance, which is the initial amount before beginning the transaction. Isolation is also ensured. Like, did you observe when SQL Server went ahead and performed that first operation of deducting $100 from my balance? None of the other transactions have been interfering with my transaction. So isolation is also ensured. Durability is also ensured. Like, I did not lose my money, right? My $100 are back and it is clearly reflecting in my balance, which is $500. And to help roll back this entire transaction log helped make this possible. That's how each and every individual transaction of all these relational engines should satisfy the asset properties of transaction. Now let's go ahead and talk about SQL Server memory architecture. SQL Server Engine is a Windows program which will allocate Windows APIs which will use the Windows APIs to allocate memory to the SQL Server. So there are several components we have inside the memory architecture. But for this particular session, we are mainly focusing on plan cache and buffer pool. But let's go ahead and see what other components we have here. The first component, the plan cache, which is one of the biggest components. It holds stored procedures, query plans, etc. The buffer pool, which is the biggest of all, it will hold 8 KB data pages and index pages in it. There are also other type of cache like log cache, token and perm user store cache. Now what this token and perm user store cache does is it will store the user permissions onto the objects. There is also other type of cache known as column store cache. which will hold column store indexes in it. Now, all these caches, which you are seeing in the blue color, are very special. Now, why I say that? They are very special because they can be easily expanded and shrinked when there is a memory pressure on SQL Server. Now, why they can be easily expanded and shrink? Because they have a backing mechanism in it. Now, what do I mean by the backing mechanism? Let's take an example of the plan cache. The store procedures which are held inside the plan cache. The query text behind that store procedure is stored inside the system tables. That's the backing mechanism. For the buffer pool, the data pages which are stored inside the buffer pool, those data pages are stored as the database files inside the disk subsystem, the MDF and NDF files. Let's talk about the other cache. The log cache is stored as the transaction log inside the disk subsystem. And the column store indexes, which are stored inside the column store cache, these column store indexes are compressed and they are also stored inside the disk subsystem. Now, all these caches, when there is a memory pressure, SQL Server will just go ahead and request to release the memory from these caches, which they can easily do that. But what about the fixed memory, which you are seeing in the green color? Fixed memory is known as fixed because it cannot be expanded and shrinked when it is in use. It can be expanded when it is not in use, but when it is in use, it cannot be expanded. Now, what kind of things will be saved inside the fixed memory? The connections to the SQL Server, like the memory grant connections that we do for the hashes and sorts of our queries, those kind of connections are stored inside the fixed memory. But as this particular memory can't be expanded and shrink when it is in use, what will happen if our queries are requesting for more and more memory grants, right? The fixed memory will get full now. That means from the SQL Server, there is an internal pressure. So whenever there is an internal pressure, there is an alert system from the SQL Server saying, I just can't go ahead and expand this fixed memory, but instead I will go ahead and alert these other caches, which you are seeing in the blue color, because they can be easily expanded and shrink, right, when there is a pressure. So now, as there is a pressure, SQL Server will first go ahead and request the buffer pool to release all of those pages out of the cache. And it will go ahead and request the other caches also, like plan cache, to evict those plans, such that we can get some memory to use for these memory grant connections. The memory is not free, right, inside SQL Server. Like if we are getting the memory for our memory grants of our queries, for our hashes and sorts, that means the SQL Server should go ahead and evict those plans out of the cache and then recreate those plans later. It's not easy, right? So that's how the fixed memory gets managed. There is also other type of cache known as SQL Server.exe overhead cache. As you know, SQL Server.exe is an executable, and many things will be running this executable, right? Like for example, the thread stacks. Even this will come under the component of the memory architecture. There is also other type of cache known as in-memory OLTP cache. In-memory OLTP is also a fixed memory. It cannot be expanded and shrinked when it is in use. So there should be some other process which should come and clean up these objects inside in-memory OLTP such that the cleanup happens and the other objects can be stored inside the in-memory OLTP. But what will be stored inside this particular cache? Memory optimized tables are stored here. So once the cleanup process happens, the garbage cleanup happens, in-memory OLTP will have more space for the newer memory optimized tables to fit in. That's just an overview of the SQL Server memory architecture. Now let's go ahead and see how the plan cache and the buffer pool gets managed. So how the memory gets managed inside SQL Server? There is something known as LRUK algorithm, which is also known as least recently used algorithm. The -K is for the complexity of the code. So what is this LRU? LRU meaning if something is staying inside the cache for the longer time without being used, those kind of things will be discarded first. Now we are going to see more about in the next slide. But how does this plan cache get managed? Plan cache is managed by two different processes. One is the lazy writer and the other is ghost cleanup. Now let's go ahead and talk about these two processes in detail. Now this particular diagram, which you are seeing on the right side, is my plan cache. It's really, really small, I know it. There are just 3 execution plans in it: the plan 1, plan 2, and plan 3. So on each and every object we have inside the plan cache, we have 2 numbers at the bottom of each object. The left side number is known as complexity code value, and the right side number is known as complexity countdown value. Now, what happens when the lazy writer gets kicked in? Usually, the lazy writer will get kicked in by every minute by the SQL Server automatically. So whenever the lazy writer kicks in, it will go ahead and check if there are any least recently used execution plans. If it didn't find any, it will just go ahead and decrement the complexity countdown value on those objects by 1. In our example, none of them will be used, so the lazy writer will go ahead and decrement the complexity countdown value for the plan 1 from 18 to 17, for the plan 2 from 9 to 8, and for the plan 3 from 2 to 1. And the lazy writer will go away. In the very next minute, the lazy writer will kick back in again to see if there are any least recently used execution plans. Here, none of them will be used again, so the lazy writer will go ahead and decrement the plan 1 complexity countdown value from 17 to 16, for the plan 2 from 8 to 7, and for the plan 3 from 1 to 0. Now, did you observe something here? The plan 3 complexity countdown value has turned to 0. That means the SQL Server should go ahead and evict this plan out of the cache, right? But that is not what it is going to happen. There is some other process which is known as ghost cleanup, which is also gets kicked in by SQL Server automatically every couple of minutes. So when it comes generally, like regularly on its process, it will go ahead and check for these plans which do not have any countdown value. Once it finds them, it will go ahead and flag them as ghosted. That means they are still inside the plan cache, but they are in the half-life. Let's say there is a memory pressure, internal memory pressure, once again happening on the SQL Server, right? In that case, the ghost cleanup, it will come and it will go ahead and evict these ghosted execution plans out of the cache. But what if there is no memory pressure? If there is no memory pressure, then SQL Server is still going to keep these ghosted execution plans inside the cache in such a way that, like, tomorrow some other user might come and he might use the same execution plan for his query, right? That's how the ghost cleanup works. In the very next minute, the lazy writer will kick back in again to see if there are any least recently used execution plans. Here, plan 2 will be used right now. So what the lazy writer does is, it will go ahead and increment plan 2 complexity countdown value to its original value, which is 9. That's how the lazy writer and ghost cleanup will manage the plan cache. Now let's go ahead and see how the buffer pool works. Now, as you know, the buffer pool will hold 8 KB data pages and the index pages in it. Basically, buffer pool has to manage 3 kinds of different structures: clustered indexes, non-clustered indexes, and heap tables. Let's say we wanted to do a select star from a heap table. You know what will happen. The buffer pool has to go ahead and grab those data pages into the buffer pool, do the operation over there, and send back the results to the user, which is very IO intensive, right? Because buffer pool has to go ahead and grab those pages multiple times, like it does many trips to the disk subsystem to do that process. But instead, if you put clustered index and non-clustered index on the top of those heap tables, buffer pool has to only go ahead and grab those pages as quickly as possible, which will it will do only few trips to grab those pages to put in the buffer pool. And this will help reduce the IO, and it will also help speed up the query process. Now, how does this buffer pool gets managed? There is something known as checkpoint process, which will be kicked in by the SQL Server automatically every couple of minutes. Now, what the checkpoint process does is, it will go ahead and check if there are any dirty pages inside the buffer pool. Now, what are these dirty pages? Dirty pages are the data pages which are already modified inside the buffer pool, but they are not yet hardened them to the database file system. Right, data pages are not directly written to the disk subsystem. They won't touch the disk subsystem to write on it. Instead, they will grab those pages, put in the buffer pool, do the modifications inside the buffer pool, and then push those dirty pages back to the database file system. So the checkpoint process is the one which will go ahead and take care of those dirty pages and place them back to the database file system and harden them onto the disk. That's how the checkpoint process works, and it will manage the buffer pool. Now, this is a very important slide. You wanted to know about this definitely. How SQL Optimizer will choose the plan. As you know, the SQL Optimizer is a cost-based optimizer. It always wanted to choose that good enough plan instead of the best plan. Now, what is the difference between two of them, right? Good and the best. The time and the cost is the difference. What if the SQL Optimizer wanted to go ahead and get that best plan instead of the good plan? Let's take an example. We have a very simple select statement here, which have a 4-table join in it, right? Let's say each table have a clustered index and 3 non-clustered index on top of each object. What if now SQL Optimizer wanted to go get that best plan instead of the good enough plan? What it have to do? Optimizer, it will first go ahead and analyze 72 different types of physical access methods per table. That means 72 times 4, right? We have 4 tables here for this particular query. That means 72 times 4 physical access methods. Now, what are these physical access methods? The optimizer, it will have to go ahead and analyze like what kind of, like whether it have to do clustered index, whether it have to use the non-clustered index, or whether it need any lookups, those kind of physical access methods, several of them. But for this particular query, 72 per table. And on the top of it, optimizer have to go ahead and analyze 24 different types of logical join orders. Now, what are these logical join orders? We have an example here that you see on the screen. We have 4 table joins in it, right? Let's say the join between A to B is filtering out around 60% of the records from the result set, and the join between B to C is filtering out around 90% of the records from the result set. In such a case, SQL like optimizer, it will go ahead and reorder the join in such a way that it will push back the join between B to C front of the statement and the join between A to B back of it. Now, why optimizer do that is because it wanted to grab the results as quickly as possible. It wanted to filter those out as quickly as possible. And on the top of it, the optimizer have to go ahead and analyze so many transformation rules. And out of analyzing all of these transformation rules, it will grab approximately 26,000 possible plans just for this very little simple query. Now just imagine how much time and resources the optimizer will consume to get that best plan for this simple select statement, right? And no user wanted to wait for such long time to grab the results. That is the reason why SQL Optimizer, instead of going ahead and analyzing all of those transformation rules, like transformation rules, meaning like whether it have to use the index, like physical access methods, logical joins, all these come under the transformation rules. So instead of going ahead and analyzing all of them, it will go ahead and analyze very quickly few of the transformation rules. And once it gets that good enough plan as quickly as possible, it will go ahead and grab that plan and save that plan inside the plan cache. And that is the reason why the optimizer, SQL Optimizer, is very quick to get that good enough plans. I would like to thank Kevin Klein for loaning me this example. If I tell the same concept in a very simple words, let's say we wanted to do a select statement onto a table, like select star from a table or any query, right? And if the optimizer will go ahead and first analyze some of the transformation rules and get that good enough plan A in 3 milliseconds, let's say, and it also find the plan B in 3.5 milliseconds. But in order for it to know if the plan A is better or B is better, it wanted to go ahead and analyze for 5 minutes. Optimizer doesn't want to do that. It don't go to that third step. It will just go ahead and grab that plan A or plan B randomly. And that is the reason why it is so quick, because it is not taking the chance to going ahead and analyzing all of those transformation rules, right? Now, let's go ahead and talk about the life cycle of a query. But right now, I will take a step back and I will ask Kathy if there are any questions coming in at this moment.
I do not see any questions right now.
Thank you, Kathy. So let's go ahead and talk about life cycle of a query then. I know this slide is like, oh my God, there are so many components here, but let me explain very simply. If the life cycle of a query is divided into 3 different steps, then the first step contains the components, parser, binder, simplification, and the trivial plan. Now, all of these components from the first step are very simple. They are very lightweight to the SQL Server. Like SQL Server doesn't require much of the metadata to process these components. It just requires like query definition, table definition, such kind of very little things, very lightweight to the SQL Server. But when you come to the second step contains the components, load metadata, join heuristics, and search phases. Now, all these components from the second step are very like they require most of the metadata to process any of the query. When you come to the third step contains the components, access methods, transaction manager, and buffer manager. Now, when you compare the third step components with the first 2 components, like first step and second step components, third step components are very IO intensive. Now, why I say that is because we have a buffer manager here, and buffer manager has to go ahead and interact with the disk subsystem to grab those pages into it, right? That is the reason it is very IO intensive when compared with first and the second steps. Now, the first step components and the second step components combinedly, they come together under the relational engine. And the third step components will come under the storage engine. Now, this is just an overview to show like what all components we have. Now, let's go ahead and see how a select statement works behind the scenes. We are also going to see the how insert statement, like how the modification statement works. But first, let's go ahead and see how the select statement works. Here we have a user. He wanted to run a select statement onto the SQL Server. He wanted to get that results as quickly as possible. No matter what kind of interface he is using, he might be using SQL Server Management Studio, Azure Data Studio, .NET Visual Studio, or even a third-party application. No matter what kind of interface he is using, he should first get that secure network connection to the SQL Server, right? But how does he get that? There is something known as SNI, which is also known as SQL Server Network Interface. Now, what SQL Server Network Interface does is it will use the internet protocols to establish the secure network connection between the SQL operating system as well as the client. Now, our client is our user here. Now, no matter what kind of SQL network, no matter what kind of internet protocol the SNI uses, like it can use TCP IP, named pipe, shared memory. No matter what kind of internet protocol we use, the process remains the same. So once the secure network connection has been established by the SNI, the query that the user is sending is wrapped into a tabular data stream packet by SNI, and that particular TDS packet will be sent to SQL operating system by SNI. So once the TDS packet has reached SQL operating system, first the SQL operating system will identify that coming connection as a SQL connection, and it will assign a SPIT to it. You know, right? The SQL process ID. when you do the SP-WHO or SP-WHO2, you see those SPIDs, SPID number 67, 95. Those are the SPIDs. That means those are the active connections that are made to the SQL Server. So once the SPID has been assigned, SQL operating system will unwrap the tabular data stream packet, and it will identify that query as a SQL query, and it will go ahead and send that query to the first step inside the relational engine. So the first component inside the first step of relational engine is the parser. So the parser, it will just go ahead and validate the syntax of our query. Let's take an example. If I wanted to do a select star from a table, but by mistake, I have given select star from. In that case, the parser should go ahead and identify that as a syntactical error and throw back me an error saying it is syntactically incorrect. Variables are declared at the parser stage. So if you are declaring those variables, whether you declared it properly or not, those kind of things are checked at parser component. Views are expanded here. Like if your query have a view in it, the query text behind that view is brought in line into the code you are sending behind the scenes. So that happens at the parser component as well. And with all this information, what the parser does is it will take the query that we are sending to the SQL Server, and it will put a hash on the query, and it will go ahead and check against the plan cache, like whether it have the same hash of the execution plan inside the plan cache already. If it finds the exact match, it will go ahead and use the same execution plan from the plan cache to the execution phase. But what if the parser did not find any exact match? Then the SQL Server will go ahead and build the initial logical tree for the first time for this query. Then the query will be sent to the binder component. Binder is also known as algebraizer or normalizer. So what the binder does is it will go ahead and check and validate the objects, like whether the tables, columns, whether they are valid or not. Parser will just identify the syntactical errors, but binder is the one which will validate the objects. And check user permissions happens at this component binder. If the user that is running the query, whether he have enough permissions to execute those objects or not, those kind of things are checked here. Data type resolution also happens here. Now, what do I mean by data type resolution here? Let's take an example. Like I wanted to run a select statement between two tables, and I'm using union all clause between those two tables. Then the ordinal column of those two tables should match in their data type. Now, if they doesn't match in their data type, we'll see that error throwing up. We are going to see this particular example for the data type resolution in the demo. Aggregate bindings also happens here, like sum, average, those kind of things are bound here. Now with all this information, the binder will go ahead and update that parse tree inside the plan cache, and the query will be now sent to the simplification component. Simplification, as the name itself says, it will simplify the query. Now how does it simplify the query? Let's say we are sending the queries which have subqueries in it. No matter how many times you send those queries which you have subqueries in it, behind the scenes, those subqueries will be converted into a very simple joins based upon the this particular simplification component, like inner join, outer join, those kind of simple joins. Now, contradiction detection also happens here. Like if you have that foreign key contradiction things, those kind of things are detected here. With all this information, the simplification component will also go ahead and update that information inside the parse tree of the plan cache, and our query will be now sent to the trivial plan component. Now, what happens at the trivial plan component, right? Now, all these four stages are known as pre-optimization stages. So the last step of the pre-optimization stage is trivial plan. So if our query is so simple, right? If you are sending a query, like let's say select star from a table or select star from a table with a simple where clause, those kind of queries are treated by the SQL Server as very simple. Now this is how SQL Server thinks. This is such an easy query, right? Why should I even go ahead and update that parse tree inside the plan cache that these previous components has been built? I do not want to consider that. So let me go ahead and discard that parse tree inside the plan cache that these other components has been built. And let me go ahead and create trivial plan on the fly, just like that. Because SQL Server, it doesn't cost SQL Server much at all. It doesn't cost any resources to go ahead and build those trivial plans on the fly. So no matter how many times you send to the SQL Server those simple queries, SQL Server will just go ahead and create the trivial plans on the fly those many times. And those trivial plans, by default, they are not saved inside the plan cache. Now there is a reason why, because it doesn't cost SQL Server much to create those trivial plans, right? It doesn't want to waste the memory inside the plan cache for these trivial plans. Instead, it wanted to save the same memory for the more complicated query plans. So once the trivial plan has been built on that simple query, that trivial plan will be sent to the execution phase and then to the storage engine to get that results, right? So what if our query is not so simple? What if our query have 10 tables in it with a very complicated logic in it? Then that query will be treated as a complicated query by the SQL Server, and it wanted to build a full plan for that particular query. Now, let's say we have a tough query, right? A complicated query. Then that particular query will now send to the second step of relational engine. Now the first component inside the second step of relational engine is load metadata. So most of the metadata that it requires to process any of the query are gathered at this particular component, like index statistics and histograms are gathered here. Now what are these statistics? Statistics are the blob structures which are saved inside the system tables to describe the distribution of the data inside a column, set of columns, or an indexed view. So basically, the optimizer will go ahead and grab that information from these histograms of the statistics to determine, like to estimates, to get those estimates, like how many rows are going to come back out of these particular operator inside our query plan. Those kind of estimates are gathered by the optimizer. So those information are gathered at this particular component. Auto create statistics also happens here. Let's say you are very frequently running a query and you are searching on a column, right? And if that particular column is not in the key column of an index, SQL Server will go ahead and just build, it will go ahead and create the statistics on that particular column behind the scenes. Now, why it creates that? Because we are very frequently running that query, and optimizer thought it would be better to create a statistics and use that information to get those estimates. SQL Server and Windows collation are also checked here. Set options are also checked. Let's say you are using like set XML on or off, set ANSI padding on or off. Depending upon on or off setting, your execution plan might be dependent. With all this information, once again, the parse tree inside the plan cache is once again updated. And now our query will be sent to the join heuristic component. Now join heuristics meaning reordering of the join. Like I have discussed in the previous slides, like how the reordering of join occurs. But let me go ahead and tell you with a very simple example. Let's say we are running a select statement on 3 tables, and we have join in between those 3 tables. Let's say the join between A to B is filtering out around 70% of the records from the result set, and the join between B to C is filtering out around 99% of the records from the result set. In that case, the optimizer, it will go ahead and reorder the join in such a way that it will push back the join between B to C front of this statement and the join between A to B back of it. Now, why the optimizer does is because it wanted to grab the results as quickly as possible by pushing back those joins front and back to get that results as quickly as possible. Now with that information, The parse tree inside the plan cache is once again updated. And now our query will go to the search phases. Now in the very next slide, I'm going to discuss what these search phases are. But for now, just remember that SQL Optimizer is a cost-based optimizer. It always wanted to get that good enough plan, right? So it will go ahead and grab that execution plan information from these three phases, phase 0, phase 1, and phase 2. Once it get that information, it will go ahead and update that information inside the parse tree of the plan cache. And our query will be now sent to the storage engine. That's the third step, right? But before going into the third step, let's go ahead and see what these search phases are. And I forgot to mention a point here. So finally, a hash is put on that execution plan, which we have updated inside the plan cache. And then our query will be sent to the third step of storage engine. But let's go ahead and talk about these search phases. So no matter what kind of query we are sending to the SQL Server, Optimizer will have to go ahead and grab those execution plan information from these three phases. So the phase 0 is known as transaction plan. So all the execution plans are created here at the phase 0 are created at the pre-optimization stage. Do you remember? I said the pre-optimization stage is the first component of the relational engine, right? The first step components, the parser, binder, simplification, and the trivial plan. Those components will come under the pre-optimization stage. That means the trivial plans are created here, right? These execution plans, like these trivial plans, are created as quickly as possible and for the queries with maximum of 3 tables in it. And very basic heuristics are needed to create these trivial plans, like table definition, query definition, those kind of simple things. But when you come to the phase 1 is known as quick plan. These execution plans are created for the queries with maximum of 8 tables in it. More transformation rules are needed here to get that good enough execution plan. More transformation rules are needed here when compared with the phase 0. So what happens with the phase 0 and phase 1 is Optimizer, it will go ahead and take our query and compare our query with already existing execution shapes. If it finds a good enough shape, it will go ahead and grab that information and use that for our query. But what happens with the phase 2? Phase 2 is completely different. It is known as full plan. Now, these full plans from the phase 2 are created for more complicated queries, like parallelism, spills, and spools to the TempDB happen at this phase 2. All the transformation rules are unlocked here. Now, what the optimizer does is, it won't go ahead and compare our query with already existing execution shapes for the phase 2, but instead, it will go ahead and prune off all the transformation rules we are not using in our query. Now, what I mean by that is, let's take an example. Let's say we are running a select statement which do not have an varchar max data type in it. In that case, the optimizer will first go ahead and prune off, it will cut off all those transformation rules which are related to varchar max, such that it can go ahead and analyze some of the transformation rules as quickly as possible to get that good enough plan information. That's how each and every query have to go ahead and grab that information from these three phases. Now our query is at the storage engine component, right? It's the third step. Now, before going into the third step of storage engine, let me tell you this. No matter what kind of query we are sending, it might be a read transaction, write transaction, update statements, all of those queries should pass the first step as well as the second step components before coming into the storage engine. If our query is so simple that SQL Server thought it would be better to create that good enough plan by creating the trivial plan, it will go ahead and come from that first step to the storage engine component once it creates the trivial plan. But if the query is not so simple, if the query is complicated, then the query should definitely pass through the second step of relational engine, and then come to the third step of storage engine. But all the difference happens at this storage engine component. Now, where? At these two components, the transaction manager and the buffer manager components. Now, let's go ahead and see the differences, but let's see first for the read transaction, what will happen. The first component here, the access methods, by itself, it doesn't perform any action, but all it have to do is it will analyze how it have to grab the results from the disk subsystem. That's all it does. Once the query reaches the transaction manager component have two subcomponents in it, the log manager as well as log manager. But as is a read transaction, we do not want it to block any other transaction, right? This is a read transaction. So transaction manager will not invoke transaction log component, but it will go ahead and invoke log manager part of it. First, it will go ahead and request the buffer manager to put a shared lock on the resources that the buffer manager needs to process this query. So once the query has now reached to the buffer manager component, buffer manager, it will first go ahead and put shared lock on the resources it needs to process this query. And it will go ahead and check if all those resources are already inside the buffer pool. If it didn't find some of them or any of them, it will grab those pages in the form of 8 KB pages from the database files, put them in the buffer pool, do the select over there, and give back the results to the user. Read transaction, very simple. But what happens with the write transaction, right? The access methods by itself, it doesn't perform any action, but all it does is it will analyze how it have to grab that results from the disk subsystem. Once the query is now reached to the transaction manager component, before writing anything onto the database pages inside the buffer pool, those modifications should be first written to the transaction log. So transaction manager will first go ahead and write those logs inside the transaction log, and then it will go ahead and invoke the log manager part of it. So it will go ahead and request the buffer manager to put an exclusive lock on the resources, because this is a write transaction, right? We do not want to interfere with any other transaction. We do not want to block any other transaction. That is the ACID properties, which we have discussed earlier in the session. So once the query has now reached to the buffer manager component, buffer manager will first go ahead and put exclusive lock on the resources it needs to process this particular query, and then go ahead and check if all of the resources it needs are already inside the buffer pool. If it didn't find some of them or any of them, it will just go ahead and grab those pages in the form of 8 KB pages, just like the read transaction, put them in the buffer pool, do the modifications over there, and send the success message to the user. Did you observe something here? The data pages are already modified in the buffer pool, but they are not yet hardened to the database file system, right? That's when the checkpoint process, it will get kicked in on its regular basis. It will go ahead and push back all these dirty pages, which are inside the buffer pool right now. It will go ahead and harden them onto the database file system. That's how the write transaction works. Now let's go ahead and see a very quick demo, like what happens to the pre-optimization stages, right? Let's go ahead and see how those pre-optimization stage component works inside the Management Studio. This is very quick. It doesn't take much time. So let me go ahead and share my Management Studio. Kathy, are you able to see my Management Studio? Can you confirm?
Yes, we can see it.
Thank you. So for this demo, we are going to use AdventureWorks 2016 database. Let me first show you how the parse only option works. Like, we can set the parse only option in two ways. The first is to do by the query, set parse only option on and execute it. Or you can just select the query and just enable this parse button inside the Management Studio. But here I'm using the query. So now let me go ahead and do a select star from a it's a simple query, right? Select star from a table. We do not have any syntactical errors here, so it doesn't throw me an error. By the way, when I turn on the set parse only option on, it doesn't execute the results or it doesn't generate any execution plan. All it does is it will just validate the syntax of the query. Now the variables are also validated at the parser component, right? So I did not declare the variable, but instead I use it in the var class. So let me go ahead and execute that. It will throw me an error, right? Because variables are declared at the parser stage. Next, let me go ahead and do this. Select non-existing column from a non-existing table. Now, what do you think will happen, right? It will, when I execute it, it will complete successfully. Now, why is that? Because syntactically, it is correct, but these column and this table does not exist. That's when the binder should kick in, right? To identify and validate the objects and like tables, columns, those are validated by the binder component. Let me go ahead and turn off the parse only option off. And let me go ahead and on set format only option on. Now, when I turn the set format only option on, we are enabling, like we are invoking just the parser as well as the binder components together. So set format only option, when it is turned on, it doesn't execute results or it doesn't generate any execution plan. All it does is it will just invoke the parser and the binder components together. So let me execute that. And set format only option is deprecated, but we can still use it in our demo, and we can still use it for the parsing and binding of our queries until they completely remove it. This particular query is a very simple select statement between two tables, and all the objects in it, all the columns in it are valid. Syntactically, it is correct. So when I execute that, it doesn't produce any results, like I said, and it doesn't throw me an error. But let me go ahead and execute the same query, select non-existing column from a non-existing table. But this time, binder component will kick in along with the parser component, right? So it should throw me an error, invalid object name. Let me go ahead and set format only option off. And let me show you the data type resolution that I was talking about at the binder component, right? So here we are doing a very simple select statement between two tables, and we are using union all clause in between those two tables. So the ordinal columns of those two tables should match in their data types. So the customer ID here is of an integer data type, and sales order ID is also of an integer data type. So when I execute that, it should simply send me the results, right? Because they match in their data type. But what if I manually created a data type resolution error to show you? The customer ID, the same query, the customer ID is of an integer data type, but I used a different column here. Credit card approval code is of a varchar data type. Now, as you know, these both data types doesn't go well with each other. When I execute it, it should throw me a conversion failed error, right? That's how the parser as well as the binder components will work together. Now let me go ahead and show you how the simplification and the trivial plan component works. For this particular demo, once again, we are using AdventureWorks 2016 database. Now let me go ahead and show you how the simplification component will go ahead and simplify the query by converting those subqueries into simple joins. Now here we have a very simple select statement, and we have a very simple subquery that we are using in this particular query, right? Now let me go ahead and select that query, and let me go ahead and turn on my actual execution plan on, and let me execute that particular query. Go to my execution plan, and did you see here? Simplification component behind the scenes, it just converted that particular subquery into a simple inner join. That's how the simplification component works. And here, simplification component, it will also remove any redundant joins that we are not using. Let's take an example here. Like we are only getting the column values from sales order header table, but we are not getting any information from sales order detail like customer table, right? We are just using here but we are not grabbing any results from the customer table. Now, when I go ahead and execute that particular query and go ahead and see in my execution plan, SQL Server just went ahead and grabbed only the results from the sales order header table. It did not touch the customer table at all. Now, why is that? It's because this particular, these two tables are actually having that relationship between each other, like they have the foreign key relationship. Because of that, SQL Server thought they already have that relationship, so I can just go ahead and trust that relationship and go ahead and discard the customer table right away and get that information from sales order header table. But what if the join is a different join, right? Instead of the left join, what if it is a right join and the other kind of joins? If these both tables do not have relationship between each other, then definitely SQL Server will go ahead and use both the tables, like the other table also, to check those relationship between both the tables as well as the columns to grab those results, and it will go ahead and use the other table as well in the execution plan. Now let me go ahead and show you how the contradictions are detected here. Here I manually created a contradiction error by saying where territory ID is equal to 1 and where territory ID is not equal to 1. So when I execute that, it should not send me any results. That's how the contradiction works. And let me go ahead and show you how the trivial plan component works. This is a very simple query, a select statement, and we are searching on a column, sales order ID column. Now, when I go ahead and execute that, go ahead and check the execution plan, do the properties on the select, and go ahead and check the optimization level here. Where is my optimization level here? Oops. Optimization level here. SQL Server thought this particular query is so simple, and it went ahead and created the trivial plan on the fly. That means this plan is not currently saved inside the plan cache, because these are very simple to be created, and there is SQL Server thought there is no use to save these inside the plan cache. But what if you have some of the queries which you which you expect SQL Server to go ahead and create a full plan, but instead it's going ahead and creating those trivial plan. I do not suggest you to go ahead and change that, but in some cases, you wanted to know that there is an option to do, to save these trivial plan inside the plan cache. Now how? Basically, the trivial plans are not stored inside the plan cache, right? You definitely wanted to convert these trivial plans into the full plan so that those plans will be saved inside the plan cache. Now, how we can do that is by enabling the trace flag 8757 inside the query. Like when you use that particular trace flag inside the query, it is only bound to that particular query. It doesn't affect the server level or the database level. Though I do not suggest you to do this in production, because SQL Server can create them easily on the fly, right, without any much resources. But let's go ahead and see how to do that. When I execute that, the same query with the trace flag 8757, it created the same execution plan. When I go ahead and check the properties, it has converted that query into a full plan. That means this particular plan is a full plan now, and it got saved inside the query like a plan cache. So that's how we have that option to create, to convert those into a full plan. That's my demo for today. Let me go ahead and very quickly share back my slides. So in the life cycle of a query session, what we have discussed today in the summary, we have first talked about the basics, the ACID properties, and how each of these relational engines should satisfy the ACID properties of transaction. We have seen with a simple bank transaction example, and how that query has actually, how that particular transaction will actually ensure the ACID property. And we have gone through the overview of different types of components we have inside the memory architecture of SQL Server. But in this particular session, we mainly focused on plan cache and the buffer pool, and how does these cache get managed. And we have also seen the life cycle of a query for the read as well as the write transaction, like what happens behind the scenes at each component inside the relational engine as well as the storage engine. And we have also gone through the components of the SQL engine, that's the components of relational engine as well as the storage engine. So in order for me to prepare for this presentation, I have followed many resources, but these are the main ones. Like if you wanted to know more in depth about the SQL Server internals life cycle of a query, please follow these resources. And I would like to thank Kathy for giving me this wonderful opportunity one more time. And it's an honor to be part of Women in Technology. And thank you so much. If you have any questions, this is the time to ask me.
Thank you so much, Deepthi. We just only had questions about posting the slides and demos and the recording. So if you can send me the slides and demos, and we'll get everything posted, tomorrow, most likely.
Right. So let me go ahead and very quickly share back my GitHub repo here.
Okay.
So the title of the title of the session is different, but the contents remain the same. So
Okay.
Let me go ahead and share that to you. That's it.
Oh, you shared it to me. So I'm going to put it
on
also to everybody.
Yeah.
Put it to everybody. Okay, good. So that's the link. And then I'm just going to save that so I can also post that with the recording, the link with the recording. So I am making a little note. So, okay, I guess if there are not other questions today, you can always reach out to Deepthi. And
I think there is a question saying how can we use this, the best use of this knowledge. This knowledge is very useful to know how the life cycle of a query works, like what happens at each component, like why the statistics are so important, at what stages the statistics get used, and how these subqueries are converted into a simple joins, and how these transformation rules are so important, how important it is to make sure that we use while writing our queries, why it is so important to make sure we use the right way to do it, and how these histograms, statistics, how are these helpful to get that good enough plan to be created and saved inside the plan cache. That's very important, like to know all of these so that we can better analyze, and it will definitely help us, like if we have any issues going on in our queries, then knowing all this information will definitely help you, like to track down, to go in depth and pinpoint the issues, like where the query might be hanging, right? Those kind of things. And I see thank you so much.
There's another one about fixed memory during an AG failover. Do you know what happens then? I don't.
AG failover. I think, I'm not sure, but I think the memory is, it is coming from the Windows level, right? So it is only bound to that particular server. That is what I think. Thank you, Christina. I hope I answered that question, though I'm not really sure, but that is what I believe.
Okay.
Thank you, Irina. So how many did we have? How many attendees did we have to the max today?
We had 30 at the max, but I'll look at the webinar report and let you know for sure.
Sure. Thank you, Kathy.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and close it up. Thanks everybody for attending today. And thanks again, Deepthi, for such an informative and really good, cool. I love the graphics and everything. Really helped explain it.
Thank you so much, Kathy. It's an honor. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful day, guys. See you again. Bye-bye.